Hello, friends and neighbors. This is DJ's Album Share, and I'm your host, DJ Roller. This week, I'm joined by Gavin Crockett. Gavin is a Richmond-based singer-songwriter who has a history of bending genres and exploring unique production styles. And the albums we'll be talking about are T.Rex, Electric Warrior, and The Velvet Underground, Loaded. Both are the remastered versions with the extra cuts on them, so we're lucky to be able to listen to that. And I appreciate all the support, guys. Enjoy the episode. This episode is brought to you by Carolina Sea Salts. Specializing in smoked sea salts, Carolina Sea Salts products can be found on Etsy. And you can like their Facebook page, Carolina Sea Salts. What's up, Gavin? How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm great, man. I appreciate you coming on the show. This is, episode 12, so we're still cranking them out here. I really liked the album that you picked. It's T.Rex, Electric Warrior, and I must say the both of the albums that we picked are extended plays on on Spotify or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So it's nice to be alive in this time.
Yeah.
The original album weren't mixed and mastered in that way and weren't released with so much material. So it's pretty cool to be able to look back and get the extra stuff there.
Oh yeah, diving into everything that surrounded the album, all the recordings, that's a really special experience.
Okay.
Especially compared to just listening to the original album. That's good.
Yeah.
But
there's a really cool interview at the end of the album as well with him, with Mark Bolan. I had a quote that he had on shared on the Instagram page. I'll pull up. He was just a prolific poet. He did a lot of different stuff as far as not just a songwriter, but he said there is so little time for us all. I need to be able to say what I want quickly and to as many people as possible. And I thought that was something that he can, even in the interview he talked quite a bit about I'm running out of time. There's just no time. There's just no time. Kind of ties into why he some of the stuff he wrote about, I guess. But just kind of the backstory of the album. This is their fourth album that they released, and this would reach number 1 in the UK charts, and the top 10 Billboard in America, which back when it meant something, was Bang the Gong. And this album was released in 1971. And crazy enough, Bolan did die in 77. So for him to be concerned with time is kind of, maybe he knew what was coming.
Maybe.
This sucks. This is that they used to go under one of under the name Tyrannosaurus Rex when they were a folk psychedelic band, which is kind of some wild stuff. They did a lot of mythological writing and stuff. It's wild, dude.
Mark always had this really interesting sense of whimsy. He was a musician, but he was also this psychedelic sci-fi writer, and it's he put that into his music. If he would have written a book, like some kind of heavy metal or Dune or something like that, it would have been, insane. Just to think what he could have done if he didn't die so young.
Right, yeah. And just to touch on the band itself, was just recently in 2020 inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yep.
So that's a cool little caveat too to put on there. Listening to the album, there's a bunch of poetic writing throughout, but one cool thing that jumped out to me on the first couple of tracks was Jeepster, because I didn't know if it was an English term or something, I didn't know what Jeepster meant. Yeah. So I actually looked it up, and it's a term referring to a young man, male, that is average or less, and he goes after the object of his affection with almost unwavering tenacity. That's the definition of a Jeepster. Yeah. So it kind of makes sense. I'm a Jeepster for your love and all this stuff. It's I think that every time. It's just interesting, because a lot of the interview he talks about having a lot of success in Europe and not having as much success in America and trying to have more success in America. And it always kind of cracks me up with some of the some of the songs that the references they have, the Jeepster, right? I don't know, is that a English term that is often tossed around or what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those are interesting things that I always try to look up when I have the interest, when I have the song. I'm where did this come from? So one question I have for you is what turned you onto this album? How did you find it? Why was this such an influential album to you?
Oh God. So I found it years ago, like in my Spotify, like 2016, after I had just gotten it. It was like a couple of songs on the album were in there in that top 100, and they were pretty close to the top. I can't remember which songs exactly they were, but I think it was I think it was Monolith.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
And
his poetic writing in that is just like it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's insane. I listened to it so much that I kind of got tired of it, but just recently I got back into the album and I'm like, wow, I realize how much I like this.
That happens almost with every music that I've ever like enjoyed, right? You have your phases where you get into it and then you fall in love with it, out of love with it, and then you revisit it. I think that's kind of what everybody enjoys about different genres of music. Yeah. Or at least enjoying different people like myself who enjoy I try to listen to just about every style of music and get influenced by almost everything. So kind of like having that fall in love moment where it's like when you first start dating a chick or something, like you have that initial fall in love moment, and then it's the honeymoon phase, so you get to enjoy it. Yeah, and then and then that falters off after a while.
And then it gets a little tiring.
Yeah, but some of my not to cut you off, continue on. You were saying that the Monolith was one of the songs that can you remember any of the other songs that you brought to mind?
Gosh.
We're talking about Mambo Sun. You said it was one of the other tracks that you found on that album. On that playlist that brought you to this album. And I think it's really interesting because I think glam rock, we were talking about it being some of the more influential and before its time. This album may have been, what influenced a lot of the glam rock into this stuff to this day. I hear a lot of different bands in this album, a lot of different influences in this album. Including your music, by the way.
Yeah. Like David Bowie was really into T.Rex. I mean, any self-respecting Brit at the time, especially in the rock scene. David Bowie was really into T.Rex. Like that one song that was recorded by is the band escaping me? Nope, Mott the Hoople.
Okay.
All the Young Dudes. David Bowie wrote it, and there's a lyric in there that says something to the effect of, I don't need TV when I've got T.Rex.
Oh, okay.
So, obviously David Bowie had some influence,
So yeah, I read it. He had quoted it at some point, but I wasn't aware of like where he had quoted the T.Rex influence, but that must be where the article I was talking about was referencing. It's pretty interesting. It's crazy because we in this generation, and I include us in the same. I may be a little bit older than you, but I still include us in a really lucky generation that we get to look back and be influenced over this music over several decades, whereas these people were being influenced by their peers. That's exactly. a completely different mindset to me. There's something to be said about certain music scenes being competitive where they don't need to be, and we need to be more cooperative, I feel. And I'm much more on the cooperative mindset because, when you look back at these dudes, I feel like they were all, like you said, they're all English. They're all like, okay, what's going on in my scene right now? And let's kind of like work to make that better. And not to say that you have to stick to what's going on in your city or whatever. But I mean, we have the internet now. You can play whatever genre of music you want to. But I do think that the cultivation of a local musician needs to be a little bit better in certain places. Yeah. I would appreciate it. I mean, I know I'm on the low end of the totem pole, so of course I'd appreciate it. But you get my sentiment.
Oh yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Having an interactive music scene is just kind of the cornerstone of any successful music scene, because if a music scene is going to be unique but at the same time iconic, it's gotta have this one vibe, I guess, if you're
and the vibe doesn't have to be a certain genre of music to me,
No,
but
it
the
doesn't.
vibe that I'm talking about is the camaraderie.
Yeah,
Is understanding that whether you play bluegrass or you play jazz or you play glam rock or whatever, that we all are using the same 12 notes. We all appreciate music. We all are kind of going after the same goal.
exactly.
You know, I don't feel the competitive nature that sometimes I do feel from some people. You know, you're like, we don't have to do this.
yeah. It's important just to like be around people, you know, get inspired by other musicians, because I mean, sure, you can get inspired by what you hear on Spotify and whatever. You can look into the history of that. The best inspiration and the best innovation is going to come from the people around you.
Definitely, because at the end of the day, those are your ones you're gonna have to play music with, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Those are the guys you're gonna have to get to play on the album, whatever.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm a
unless
big
you
fan
have
of
a lot of money.
T.Rex, but I'm not playing with Mark Bolan or anything, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved that, though, about certain genres of music, especially in the 70s time period, right? The Velvet Undergrounds, the T.Rex, the David Bowie, all that stuff. Even other genres of music, Southern rock, everything. You're looking at something that was literally invented, and then peers are sharing information, and they're just like, oh yeah, I can do something like that. You know, I love that. I want more of that in the music industry instead of less of it. So
yeah, the collaborations going on now, though, especially because, you know, pandemic and everything, people are reaching out. People are
definitely
coming together musically.
I hope that's gonna be what we look back on and go, okay, that was the positive out of it, is that we kind of realize that, we need each other, you know, like even this podcast so far has, you know, I wouldn't have never known of T-Rex, or I wouldn't have never realized I knew who T-Rex. I knew Bang a Gong or Get It On or whatever. I knew the song, but I didn't realize who the band was. I didn't understand the history of the band. I didn't understand who Mark Bolan was. So there was a lot I learned from this album that I would never have learned if we never sat down and have this conversation. So I love this. I love the camaraderie between it, you know. And like we've been talking about, we can all learn from each other. So going back to the album, though, you know, they got a bunch of stuff on here. Obviously, Bang a Gong, probably their biggest hit in America.
Yeah,
you know,
it's definitely the most radio friendly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And that's I'm glad you said that, because going forward, when we're talking about the next album, that's going to be a huge topic. But with these guys, you know, they didn't set out for any of this they definitely set out for this to sell in America, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't set out for this to kind of be anything more than a great representation of their band.
Yeah.
And there's a quote in the interview that I like to read. He said, I think Electric Warrior, this is Mark Bolan speaking. He says, I think Electric Warrior for me is the first album which is a statement of 1971 of us in England. I mean, that's if you ever wanted to know why we're big in any other part of the world, this album says it for me. So that's the man himself saying about this album, that this is the representation of them. Because, you know, they went through an evolution like we were talking about, from folk psychedelic rock into this, glam rock band that actually was a huge hit overseas, but then they came to America and everybody's like, yeah, whatever. You know, we saw the Beatles, man. But it's awesome to hear. I love these interviews. Like to me, it's one thing to idolize or not even idolize, to be influenced or inspired by a musician or an artist. It's another thing to hear something where they're like, this is the piece of art that I love. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, cool. That's a connection that you have with that person at that point. Because you both, you know, he put this out for someone to appreciate it, and then you as the listener, you're like, oh, well, I really like this album. Cool. And I'm glad that you put this much into it, you know? So it's it's a cool experience.
It just kind of, it's kind of a motivator if I can use this song from the album. Like,
there you go.
You know, if you put a lot of pride into your music and anybody discovers it, and they like it, that it's all worth it.
Yeah. One listen is worth it, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I've always... I'm much more of a... I love the live performance. I connect much better with people in a live performance. I love being able to play and see the moment where people like because a lot of times, unless you're playing at a venue where people pay tickets, buy tickets to see you personally, which I've done, and I've also done the being wallpaper at a bar where you're just like trying to get people's attention all night. And
Exactly.
what's even more interesting to me is the bar gig, because it's a challenge to me. I'm like, okay, now my job is to make that dude who doesn't want to pay attention to me go, well, they sounds pretty good. Like, when I can see when I can turn people. And if you can ever flip people over on that switch and get them to interested in you, that's a really cool moment. I play mandolin, dude. So, like, it's not like I'm playing some instrument that people actually, they not know. For one, most people think it's a ukulele. So, so it's like, it's interesting though. That moment when you kind of capture the crowd, I love that. And I've played pretty decent shows before, so size shows. I mean, so I feel like I have a representation of accurate representation of the situation. But I really love this album, dude. Is there any other tracks on the album that really jump off to you? You mentioned Motivator.
Yeah. That's a good reference. Not the most remarkable track to me.
And the last one's Rip Off or whatever.
Oh yeah. That is a fun track.
Yeah, and he actually talks about it in the interview, I think, as well, right? He talks about how that it's just how he feels about the system.
Yeah,
everything's a rip off.
Yeah, and like T.Rex got political like that. I don't know what Mark Bolan was a believer in, but like they released songs in the future like Children of the Revolution,
right?
And it was a lot of commentary on society and politics when it just didn't seem like a very worldly band. They were larger than life,
right?
Especially Mark,
right?
Because he was going out there in his shiny jumpsuits and stuff like that, capes and stuff.
You're also talking about a time period where that sort of thing is kind of popular as well,
Yeah.
So,
same year, Sly and the Family Stone, they what album was it? I think it was There's a Riot Going On, that was released in 1971, and it was released I don't know what month, but same year. Same vibe, much more outwardly political. And there is a thing about societal commentary that I feel is very common, especially in glam rock and those kind of detached psychedelic genres, that is really understated. It's not just outwardly like Rage Against the Machine or something like that.
Right.
Saying,
fuck you, I won't do what you tell me.
Exactly.
That's a little on the nose, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, it's kind of a suggestion like, hey, this is kind of screwed up. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Which is, shows to the how good of a song or a writer. I'm not going to say songwriter. How good of a writer Mark is. Like he talks about in the interview doing books and poems and how he differentiates songs and poems, and that was a really interesting thing for me, because I'm not a self-proclaimed songwriter. Wow, I don't know why that was so hard. But I don't like to write songs as much. I'm just not confident in it. It's not my thing. So when you hear a songwriter or a writer talk about how he writes a song versus how he writes a poem, because to me, I would just assume poetry and songwriter are damn near the same, right? Like
they're real different,
right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as someone from the outside, I would just assume that they're relatively similar, And I'm hearing a guy who's as good as he is talk about it, you kind of the light bulb. You're like, oh, okay. Okay, that makes much more sense. Like, there's much more. I mean, and when he said it, I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's 100% logical. There is some meter and stuff to how the song, the melody goes, that will change the lyrics and make some lyrics more powerful than others, So it made complete sense, but it was just a light bulb switch that I had not thought about,
Yeah, and just running with that subject, for me, Mark Bolan kind of helped me. This album helped me kind of embrace a little more bizarre side of how I write, because I'm a very literal writer, or not necessarily literal, but very grounded.
You write about what's going on right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't tend to mince words or get into fantastical stuff, but he taught me, hey, that can be really, really cool.
Yeah.
Especially if it's done right.
Done correctly. That's the issue, and I think that's the hang up with a lot of folks who, because I find the stuff that I write is, I wouldn't say in any way similar, but literal like that, like you're saying. Yeah. And when you don't have the other thought process, you hear someone else kind of influence you. You're like, okay, maybe I can try that, But yeah, his stuff is definitely much more metaphoric.
It just kind of took place in this fantasy world he had, and it was all about. It wasn't like Blue Oyster Cult sci-fi, and it wasn't. It wasn't Led Zeppelin kind of Tolkien kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was kind of spacey, kind of just really out there, really universal, and it's just immediately identifiable. It isn't cheesy either. And I think he blended this kind of futurism so well with the past, because he was a huge Mark Bolan, huge fan of Eddie Cochran. If you it's funny, they share a lot of parallels in their lives, but I'll get to that later. His Les Paul that he was very, very proud of, never stopped using it, is actually refinished in like this Gretsch orange.
Oh, nice.
Because he was so inspired by Eddie Cochran. And he was like, I want to be like that guy, and you can hear the kind of rockabilly vibe, especially
definitely.
in like Bang a Gong.
And then they have the straight blues song with Lean Woman Blues,
right?
Like they have some total like American blues references, stuff there that where you're like, that always amazed me about some of these more heavy British guys who come over here for popularity, and it's like, well, damn, you're playing blues shit.
You're doing it really well.
You're doing it. It's not like, I don't know. I wasn't alive in that time period, but for me, listening back from my perspective, you're like, wow, well, it's one thing to play a genre and do it not well and to not sound good. It's another thing to like kind of pay homage to it and like, do something well and also kind of put your own spin on it,
Yeah.
And I think that crosses genres. I mean, I play bluegrass. I play a lot of different stuff. So it's like the same applies whether you're playing blues or if you're playing like Delta blues and you're not doing certain things, it doesn't sound like Delta blues. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So like I think that's something when you decide to play a certain genre. I'm not saying that there's prerequisites. Like there's definitely innovators that will break the mold, but there are some things that kind of tonally kind of check you in. So like the blues stuff, when you hear them do some certain stuff, and they're good at it, like you said, they're doing like some really cool like on that Lean Woman Blues, he does some interesting from a musician's point. I'm like listening to the guitar lines going, oh, that's like a little different. It's standard, but it's a little different. It has a variation. So I loved it. Not to jump over, but I'm just gonna go ahead and transition to the next album. You cool with that?
Yeah.
So Loaded from Velvet Underground. Actually, I need to correct this. I think I said that the T.Rex album was their fourth, but that's not right. The Loaded album was the Velvet Underground's fourth album. The T.Rex album was actually the second album they put out under T.Rex, and the sixth album they put out total. Yeah. So I want to correct that. I don't mess that up. But what I love about the Velvet Underground stuff is like it's almost like, so if you listen to the stuff with the stuff with Lou Reed in '72, where he kind of the David Bowie produced album with Transformer or whatever, you listen to that and you listen to this, and it's like, because that's kind of more that's probably Lou Reed's biggest stuff, right?
Yeah.
You listen to that and you listen to this, and it sounds similar because he's the main writer on the stuff, but it's a little more like loose,
Yeah.
And I love that, dude. To me, that's a real band.
Yeah,
that's a real band.
It's kind of almost, it's just it feels like they were having a lot of fun, And
well, they were. That's why the name of the the name of the album is Loaded. I want to bring this up. I read a lot about this album as far as like I delved into kind of the history of the album, what was going on with the band, and Atlantic Records had requested that the Velvet Underground make an album loaded with hits. So they named the album Loaded, and it kind of is a double entendre because it also is like, you get fucked up, you're loaded. So it was like
the drug scene was crazy.
Exactly. The drug scene in New York too, because they're like with Andy Warhol, dude. They were the house band for like Andy Warhol's fucking art exhibit. So yeah, dude, you can imagine what kind of drugs they were on, just out of this world.
Drugs, it was debauchery, it was everything.
Well, that's something that a quote I read, and I can't quote who it was, but it was something that was very interesting. Lou Reed, the poet of destruction. Right,
yeah,
so he goes to that place.
Really
he goes to that place to where like whatever the fucked up shit's going on, and instead of turning away and not looking, he just stares at it and he writes about what's going on.
Yep.
And that was a moment where I was like, it was again another light bulb moment where I was like, damn man, that makes a lot of sense. All of his songs kind of make a little bit more sense after that.
Yeah, it puts it into perspective. Like I'm really seeing that now that you said that.
Yeah, it's really cool, dude. Like I've tried really hard to research this stuff, and because I'm a music nerd, dude. Like I'm also a self-taught music nerd. So I'm a sponge for information because I know that that's the only way that I learn. Without having a teacher that tells me a piece of music to learn or whatever, I'm the one that has to motivate myself.
Yep.
I'm the one that has to. It's hard. It's not easy. It's not a very easy thing to do, but little nuances like this are kind of motivators in a weird way for me, to where you're like, oh wait, he was like, that's why he was so writing about such interesting stuff at the time, and stuff that's still applicable to today's time. He's writing about in 71, 70, or before that, 67, so it's like that aspect of it was really, really interesting to me. And despite of the success of several singles on this album never charted, which is crazy to me to think that like Sweet Jane, Rock and Roll, and what's the shoot, I'm gonna have to look at the track listing, but there's another one on there. Oh, Sweet Nothing. Yeah. But to think that those three are on the same album and this album never charted is like, are you kidding me? I have no hope.
Like,
there's no fucking hope, dude.
No hope at all.
There's no hope at all. If you can write 3 songs like that and your album doesn't hit a Billboard chart, like,
I'm pretty sure those are like all 3 of them are part of their top 5 on Spotify.
Right, exactly. And they were definitely great singles for them, right? Yeah. And so that was something that I took away. So part of the podcast came from an idea from my dad. My dad said that you don't know what it's like to save up money, go to a record store, buy a record because the album cover looks cool, take it home and play it, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
So part of it is like we listen to singles, and it comes from this thought process with this album, which is very ironic to me because this album was made specifically for singles.
Yeah,
which is like kind of goes against everything I'm trying to do with this podcast, which was like a realization I had during. I was like, damn, all right, but that's why part of the reason why this is literally the last Velvet Underground album. And before Lou Reed leaves, and then the other members leave. And actually, funny enough, Lou Reed leaves in August, and this of 1970, and then this album's released in November. So he left the band before this album came out. Although he wrote most of the music, although he sings and he plays, he does most of the stuff. He was out, and there's a lot of controversy around this album, like who mixed it, who did this, and I was reading a lot of this stuff, and I was like, geez, at the drama, like,
yeah. Oh my god,
but. It just ties into why musicians like myself kind of hate that thought process that why I have to make 10 singles. That doesn't happen, man. That doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen.
And so, like, the fact that he could pull off 4, because I think Who Loves the Sun, Sweet Jane, Rock and Roll, and Oh Sweet Nothing were all, like, top chart singles. Yeah. And so it's like, the fact, that's pretty good average.
Yeah.
If you were playing baseball, that's a damn good average.
Yeah.
So, I look at this as something that almost of a hate project from them, because like, although I love almost every song, I love the way that the album flows. I love the way the album's put together. I love, like, I can listen to this. There's very few albums I can listen to that I don't want to just like skip a track, you know. And this is one of the albums where it's like let it roll. Those are one of my favorite albums to just put on, just let it roll. And it's crazy to think that they didn't want it, but didn't want to record it that way.
Yeah, it's it's crazy to think that, you know, we've become so detached from just making great albums. I mean, there are bands out there like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard comes to mind, where they're making like real album oriented kind of stuff where you've got to listen to the whole thing to get the vibe.
Andy Schaaf was a previous person I've listened to. You should check out another artist that is a newer artist that you listen to. That same type of thing where he takes you through an experience on the whole album. Where, you know, like man, I think that, you know, going through what we're about to go through, another thing to if you like country music, like Culture Wall and Tyler Childers. You know, they are a little bit mainstream, but a lot of their stuff right now is super in this realm where you listen to an album or you listen to a whole set of songs for them and they all flow in together. They all are kind of like a track are listed together in a certain way. And I love that stuff, man. I think going forward, it may be the route to success and people just are starting to wake up to that, you know?
Yeah. Because it was Culture Wall's first EP, which I'm still stunned that, you know, it could ever have been his first Imaginary Appalachia, and it's every single song has a reason for being there.
Right.
You know, it's not like going to a party where a bunch of people are invited and it's like some people are just sitting in the corner. No, this is a group.
Right. They're supposed to be there.
Real tight knit. And that's songs have got to be like a group of friends, you know?
Right.
They can't be perfect strangers.
Right. Especially if you know you have a majority of the songs or even all of the songs are written by one person. Like there's a personal connection at that point. Like I primarily play with songwriters. It's usually what I'll do. I'm an accompaniment instrument with songwriters, right? And I find that the set lists that they build or whatever, like it's all based upon personally what they want to feel in that set list, right? So maybe like 10 songs, maybe 5. It maybe we're playing a 3-hour gig and it's 3 15 set songs, you know. But each set has a feel. Each set has an intended purpose. Each set has something behind some thought process behind the song listing. You know, we don't just go into it blind. You know?
You can't just, you know, just throw a bunch of songs.
No, it doesn't work that way. And I think that for the non-musician out there, that's something that people don't. Maybe they do. I've never heard of a lot of non-musicians take into account and like give like credit. You know, there's something that when you go to a live show to where you hear a sad song, then a happy song, then the upbeat song, and the slow song, like you don't realize that this person is like it's a theatrical event at that point. You know?
Exactly. You know, it's you know a concert is really a play. It's you know it's telling a story.
It can be all those things. It is whatever the artist wants it to be at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it is what the artist wants. But yes, it can be. Like some of the more glam rock stuff with your David Bowie stuff, back to what we're talking about. Super theatrical stuff, right? Like even some of the T.Rex stuff where I was listening to it, I'm like, man, I getting Bowie vibes, but I'm realizing that this is pre-Bowie doing that stuff. So it's like it was a conflicting thing because of the time period that I was actually listening to the music, to where I'm associating it with a musician that came or a style of music that came after this album, which was pretty interesting. After both albums, actually.
I mean, it's like. You know, it's like for me, I mentioned I'm a really big fan of the Black Keys.
Right.
And then I'll go back and I'll listen to like Muddy Waters, Junior Kimbrough, you know, all those blues artists.
My favorite's Taj Mahal.
Taj Mahal is amazing. Yeah. I listen to all those blues artists that like directly inspired them, and I'm like, wow, that's where they got that from.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, you know, coming back to these guys, like these the T.Rex and Velvet Underground, think of the bands that they influenced. The Pixies. I mean, I can't even name. I can start a list, but like we could like go for days. Over how many bands that they influenced. Probably the stuff that you wouldn't even imagine. You know, I growing up playing traditional like folk music, you realize that a lot of people start playing that and then they go off in their own version of that. And it's like, only the people who are like super traditional give a shit. I love it. Hey, if this is your version, let me learn how to play your version. Because that just, in the end of the day, makes me better.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm like in a quest to get better constantly. So I love that. But I have seen people who play like bluegrass then turn it into their own like version of bluegrass or whatever. I'm totally on board with that. But I can totally see somebody taking both of these albums as an influence and then turning it into something completely on the other end of the realm.
Yeah,
so
completely.
It's so many mind-opening, eye-opening occurrences through both of these albums. You're like, oh, that's cool, because every time you listen to another artist, whether it be their writing or their musicianship or their composition or song selection or all of these things, to me, I try, or at least because I'm subjecting myself to someone else's choice of music every week now, I am trying to take away something, right? So every time, it's changed the way I listen to music, man. Doing this podcast has changed the way I literally listen to music. I take that back. It's made two different versions of listening to music. It's the casual, just playing something, and then if I really want to listen to something and study something, it's totally different. And I love that. It's like doing your homework. It's weird. It's a weird version of like doing schoolwork or something, It's and I feel like we go as musicians. I feel like I say this every time, but we get tied up in our own egos, and we don't take enough time to appreciate our influences. Yeah, and we really need to do a little bit better at that. I need to do a little bit better at that. I don't even realize who influences me at this point because I listen to so many different musicians. So, the album though, Loaded. I don't know, man. Is there anything that jumped off the page to you that was really just like a song that you loved, other than some of the stuff? I mean, even if it was some of the stuff that I brought up already.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of Sweet Jane for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great song.
It's just had that perfect. I hate to say vibe. I don't want to say vibe. It's just had that perfect composition where it's like really poppy, like that Sweet Jane,
Yeah, that hook on it is great.
That hook, but then you get into like Lou Reed doing that little bridge, doing that little bridge there, especially like Heavenly Wine and Roses.
Yeah, that's a good part
and
too.
It just kind of breaks that and breaks the comfort.
Yeah, man, and I think that speaks to Velvet Underground's. Again, they're being forced right there to make a number one hit, right? Yeah. And then you take them, and they're like, yeah, but we still want to be.
Yeah,
we still want to be weird. Yeah, I think we all like at the end of the day, musicians we're tired of playing do re mi. Because do re mi is how you basically are introduced to music. Do re mi is like do re mi fa sol la ti da. That's like the thing, right? And regardless of what instrument you play, at the end of the day, it all comes back to kind of the do re mi. Like it comes back to just that pattern. For me, all the music I've ever learned comes back to a pattern, and you learn the pattern, and then once you get good at the pattern, you get bored of the pattern, and you want to break the pattern. So to me, it was them going, okay, we know what a good song is, we know how to make a good song, but we also want to be authentic in doing it. Yeah, and I just love that, man. It's so addicting, it's so inspiring to listen to, where you're just like, fuck yeah, I want to listen to this again. Also, too, it's when you have I hate that I love this album because of how forced they were to make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm a shill.
Yeah, it's like pure. I mean, it isn't pure corporate at all.
It's just angst.
It's just it's just
angst. Pure angst, dude.
And
I feel like this whole album is angst.
Really didn't want to just go with the flow on that kind of thing. They wanted to make something that they were proud of, because Lou Reed doesn't ever strike me as the guy who's like, oh, I'm gonna make this and it's gonna make me money, but I'm not gonna put any effort into it. Right. Like he's
the epitome of an artist. What you want an artist to be, which they someone who cares about their craft, someone who also like the art that they put out or the content or whatever you want to call it. Nowadays we call it content. Yeah. What they put out, they actually care about. Maybe it's not the top quality of everything, but they still give a shit about it, So.
Yeah. And the thing about him is he's also just, as you were saying, a sponge for his experiences. Mm-hmm. He'd take something that is really, frankly, kind of awful,
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
Like all of the drug use going on and people were overdosing and dying and stuff like that. He was right there in the middle of it, and he still managed to make something beautiful out of something really, really ugly.
I think we like as humans, for some reason, we just love the guy who goes into the fire. You know, we just love that dude.
Yeah.
Hunter S. Thompson is another example of that in that time period with gonzo journalism, right? Where gonzo journalism is all about you're going in and doing the thing and then telling people what that's about, you know? Yeah. So like that whole we love that. We love that shit. We love somebody who just goes through the shit and tells us what they went through. And I love that he was able to be more successful after, which brought more eyes to this album, because this is like one of my favorite albums in that like genre of all time, man. Of all time. Like I love Velvet Underground, I always have. And the fact they had like a chick drummer too back in the day.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
It's almost like the Allman Brothers and like having like double drummers and like having a African American drummer as well. Like all those things like in the time period that were like taboos almost, where it was like it was only you know, people
it wasn't like outwardly like, oh, you can't, or it often was.
It often like, was, yeah.
But like you know, it was just like kind of like a big middle finger to the system.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, because at the end of the day, it's how much do you practice and how bad do you want it? You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what gender you are, what color you are, whatever. Whatever instrument you play, if you're good at it, I'll listen to you play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I want to listen to you play, because then it's going to inspire me. So it's like, shit. If I what I respect is your hard work. So when you listen to this and you listen to like you know, all these people playing music regardless of their background, you have no clue of these people. You don't know these people.
Yeah.
These people are dead and gone already. So it's like it's lovely to kind of like get in a space to where you're like, man, I just love listening to what you're doing. Yeah. You know, like fuck what's going on. I just want to listen to this. And I know there's a lot of political tie-ins with all this stuff, right? But at the same time, man, like you can really everybody can kind of relate to angst.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like I feel like everybody can relate to both of these albums, and I enjoy listening to both of them, man. But I'm you know, we've done our time, man. We've done what we need to do. Is there anything else you want to cap on these albums? Say it now.
Well, earlier I just want to tie this up. Like
absolutely,
I mentioned both Mark Bolan and Eddie Cochran. They were like really successful in their home countries, you know, like Mark in the UK, Eddie in the US, and they just had this hit, Bang a Gong versus Summertime Blues, that just really made it. And then shortly, right after they showed a ton of promise, they died in a car crash. It was eerily similar, especially considering how much Mark was a fan, you know, of Eddie Cochran. And you know, that's just a little creepy detail to add on.
I love it, dude. I love it. And then, you know, these are things that, like, as a musician, which I feel like just from the conversation we've had here, like I realize the dedication and the thought process you put into this album. And I love it, dude. I love it. Absolutely love it. And what people don't realize is, like, people like yourself and I, like, we listen to this music and then we want to go find out the next facts, and we want to go find out the next thing, and we want to hear the story.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books of all time is Greg Allman's Not My Cross to Bear. And it's just a book of which I'm a huge Allman Brothers fan, right? So like huge Allman Brothers fan. But in this book, it's just literally like him telling rock and roll stories from like the beginning of his life to the end of his life. And he's just telling like, oh yeah, Dr. John came on stage one time and played my organ and threw Grigri all over it, which Grigri is like this New Orleans like voodoo shit, right?
But yeah.
It's like glitter. And so like the glitter got stuck in the keys of the organ. It's like a B5. Like he had like a fucking nice organ, and like he had to take it and get it cleaned. He's like, yeah, fuck Dr. John. And it's just like, I love that shit. Those stories, those little things are just like, God, it's so interesting, man. And it makes it even better that you knew that the Allman Brothers and Dr. John were on the same scene at the same time. Like, that shit was so cool, you know, to me, growing up.
Oh, they knew each other.
They knew each other, man, yeah. And, I mean, and that's an interesting book because there's a lot of that. There's some Jackson Browne references where they were in the same songwriting circles, and I'm a huge proponent of that book. if you're listening, you should also check out that book, man. That's a fucking really cool book. But I appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you on in the future. I love the album pick. Thank you so much. And definitely, man,